Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we'll be talking about literature review. It's something that you have to be doing it all the time when you're writing papers, when you write your thesis. So the same things apply from the undergraduate, the postgraduate degree, as well as the PhD. It's something that I have been asked a lot by my students, and I will give you some tips and some perspectives of how you should treat the literature review. I'm not going to go into the detail of how to do the research itself, but I'm going to talk about the styles of the literature review, the most common ones, and how you should go about starting the literature review. Something that, as I said, I'm getting a lot from my students when they come to my office and they ask me where do I start from? So first of all, let's clarify that literature review is extremely important. It's something that you have to have in your thesis or in your paper, and you have to show that whatever you're doing is sort of incremental. Research, as we said in another video, as you can see here, is either incremental or blue sky research. So you either start from something that has already been done before, or you start from scratch. Now the latter one is usually very, very uncommon. We never do blue sky research unless there is a big question for many years that we want to respond. Everything else is incremental. So you need to know what is the state of the art. You need to know what has been done already to read it very well, and once you grasp that, then you can build on your research on that. So understanding what the research questions of today are in order to be able to do something and solve it for the future. So putting the references into your work, it means that you are acknowledging someone else's work, you understand what others have done, and you're building on that knowledge. That is the way that every paper and every thesis should be presented. They should start from what is the existing knowledge, what is the history, what is the background, how the literature review has been involved over time, and then what is the actual research question, in order then to proceed with your work, whatever you're doing, again, for a paper or for a thesis. So by that, you understand that the literature review sits somewhere at the beginning of your report. So if, for instance, we're talking about theses or dissertations, usually you start with a chapter which is the introduction, and then right after that is the literature review. That is where you should present what everybody else have done and what is the gap in the knowledge, and then you will proceed with your chapters where you will present your experimental work or your surveys, your analytical work, computational work, and the discussion, etc. One of the very common questions that I get from my students is how to go about finding papers. So there's another video where I presented how to go about searching using ResearchGate, Google, and other engines and find the publications. At the end of the day, you can go through your university's website and you can search from the library, and you can find most of the papers. You can go to Science Direct, you can find from Scopus, you can find from ORCID, you can find from a lot of different sources, as well as go through your professor, your supervisor, and ask whether he or she can share some information with you, some specific documents in which you can go and you can read them, as well as you can find more research papers through their references. So again, one of the very common practices to find more and more relevant work is finding some key papers, read them well, go to the references, find more work, and then through that you can see more and more research into that area. So very common practice, do the same, is extremely useful. Now, once you have these papers, let's say you have the first 5 or 10 papers for your thesis, what you should be doing. So at that point, it is very tricky to go and read all these papers very, very thoroughly. So I would recommend that you, first of all, you study the abstract of the paper, and if you find that is useful, then keep it. If you find that is not, just disregard that. Now, if you find that is useful, you have then to go through a bit more about what is exactly presenting and how is presenting it. So you need to go through the introduction of the paper, mainly the conclusions of the paper, to find if this is relevant to your work, and a bit of the methodology. One quick way to read papers is just look at the figures and the pictures. As we say, one picture is 1,000 words, so by just looking at the figures and the pictures, you can get an idea of whether the paper is relevant to your work or not. If it's very relevant, you put it aside. If it's not that relevant, you put it on the other side. In this way, when you write the literature review, you should be able to follow the ones that really do matter to you, where the other ones that will be just there for supporting some of your statements. So now from that category that you've got a good number of very relevant papers, you should go through the references and find more relevant papers. And also at some point you should pick one or two, maybe three papers which will be the kind of the template for your research. So you will try to use the same approach, the same methodology or a similar methodology for your research. You have to have a guidance, you have to have a basis. So I always recommend, especially when we're talking about the undergrad students, but also for the PhD students, that you've got something like that and you work on that basis. That will be much easier to then expand on the thesis and do more things, but you have at least a basis to work on. Of course, needless to say that for those papers you will have to study them very thoroughly, very meticulously. You have to highlight things, you have to follow a very similar format. So now that you have done the proper research and you found a lot of papers, maybe say 10, 15, 20 papers, that's a good question that I'm getting a lot of times, like how many papers should I get for my thesis? It depends on the style of the thesis, the level of the thesis. I would say that for an undergraduate student, I would expect, like on a third year student, that they will have 20 to 30 references in an engineering topic, a classic engineering topic. If you are a master's student, I would expect 50 or 60. And of course, when we're talking about a PhD, you may have hundreds of those references, and you may want to even split them to references and bibliography. So the references are the very much relevant ones. The bibliography is something that is a bit more about the topic, or they're supporting some appendices, etc. As we discussed also in other videos, if you're writing a paper, you should have a balanced number of publications. I would not expect more than 50 or 60 publications unless it is a review paper, and then you can have even hundreds of those. So now that you have done the literature review, you know what is the state of the art. You can definitely identify the state of the art, what is the latest, most current development in that field of research. And what you're looking for is the research question for your work. That means that the literature review is something that you do at the very beginning, right? Although it's the second chapter, and a lot of students, they want to write it right at the end when they have concluded all the writing and everything, all the work that they have done in their thesis. Truly, the literature review is something that we start with. So now, through that literature review, you have identified what is the research question. So I always recommend to my students at the end of the literature review to have a section, maybe half a page or a page, where it's called Gap in the Knowledge or Critical Review. And that is a summary of what has been done already. And what do you feel is the gap in knowledge? What is missing? And of course, that will lead you very nicely to the next chapter that will be part of the main context of your thesis. So you will then say that out of the things that are missing, this is the one that this particular project will tackle. So at this point, let me also say that because of the great number of publications that you will gather, maybe in total, the references and the bibliography, the ones that are very relevant, the ones that are not so relevant, there are maybe more than 100, even for a bachelor thesis. You can imagine how many there will be for your PhD. It's good if you use any of these online systems to track your research. And there is a plethora of videos online you can go and check. I think two of the most common ones and the best that the students use are Mendeley and EndNote. So go check those two. I'm sure that one of the two will do the job for you. You can categorize them very easily and you can bring them forward to your paper, to your thesis. Pretty straightforward. So instead of like being lost in the number of publications, it's good if you use those ones. Even myself, that in some cases I feel that I'm quite an old style person, whereas in other cases not. I believe that when it comes to writing your literature review and writing and handling all these publications, it's good to use such a software to organize yourself. It will save a lot of time, believe me. So let's say by now you have identified all these papers, you've read them, you made some notes on the papers, you highlighted certain things. what do you do next? So one of the most effective styles that I have used, and I'm always saying to my students to use it, I'm suggesting it at least, is that for every paper that you're reading, you should write a summary of your own. So this summary is not the abstract, because the abstract is like a selling pitch, and in some cases the abstracts are limited by 100 words. Also, another thing is that the abstract is talking about the entire paper, whereas now you have a summary which is more tuned to what you want to get out of that paper. Maybe only 10-15% of the paper is relevant to your work, so you should write your own summary. Summary is usually part of the methodology, a little bit part of the main context and the main conclusions. So it's reading the paper and getting the main idea of that paper which is relevant to your work. So write your own summary. Maybe it's just half a page, doesn't need to be more than that, because in any of the two styles that I will tell you in a minute how to write the literature review, you just need to use maximum half a page. You don't need to have more than that. So please do not go and write 1.5 pages from each paper. That is almost a plagiarism, and really it doesn't add anything. It's better if you just send to someone the link of that paper and go and read it, if it is to read your 1.5 page. But if you have a good summary of 5 lines, let's say, that's much more useful. So coming now to the point where you're writing. So I do recommend 2 different styles to my students. Now, the first style is a bit easier for you to write, but usually it's a bit harder for those that will read it, because again, it doesn't have the flow, whereas the second style is the vice versa, the opposite. So let's start with the first one. So the first one now is split in 2 different sub-styles. One is defined by chronological order, and the other is defined by the type of the work. So let's start with the chronological order, where you start with using those summaries that you developed before, and you're putting them there starting with the latest, with the most current. So someone will go into your literature review and they will read first the most relevant paragraph. Now we have 2022, so you will have the 2022 papers by paragraph, writing the title, writing the reference, and then writing the summary. Again, this summary is very much relevant to your work, right? So it has to have that sort of flow between the paragraphs, but they are discrete and independent. At the same time, you may want to use the second sub-style and put them in different sections. So break that in different sections. Maybe one is about, let's say, experimental work, and then the other is computational work, and then the other is about theoretical work. So you put them there into sections, and again, in every section you start with the most latest work and you go backwards. So usually the readers, they will not go all the way down unless there is a good reasoning. Otherwise, they will only follow the first few paragraphs of every subsection, and that's it. But that's fine, it's totally acceptable. The second style now is a bit more difficult to write, as I said. So there is where you have all that information that you developed over the time, with your paragraphs, with your notes, and you're trying to connect all these things. You can now write an essay about everything all together. You can break it in sections if you want, and you can start with the latest thing if you want. But usually this is not how it goes. Usually how it goes is that you start saying, initially those researchers investigated that, and then you're putting a few references, and you elaborate a bit further on that. So you take a few sentences out of those 5-line summary for each paper, and you're trying to link them to connect those papers that they have done a similar work. And then you are developing the discussion and say, then later on, this is what happened. And then you're getting again a few more papers and you're putting them together, a few more references, you elaborate a bit further. And in this way, you're building an essay in which you make a story where things started and how things were evolved. Therefore, you are linking all the research into a main nice narrative that you have developed yourself in order to come up at the very end of that 5-10 page report, the literature review section, and say that this is now where the state of the art is, this is the latest research that has been done. Therefore, then you move on to the final section and say, this is the gap in knowledge. So let me go again about the two styles. First style is writing paragraphs, usually with a chronological order starting from the latest, and each paragraph is independent in sections or not. And the very final paragraph is about the gap in the knowledge, where you are saying what you got out of these summaries and what is the resume, what is the conclusion of that, and what is the gap in knowledge. Whereas the second style is a bit more of an essay and a nice narrative, bringing everything together, and you don't have to write that much, but it has to make sense. We start from the oldest and we go to the most recent work. So at the end of that report, you should be talking about what is happening now, and that will be followed by your critical review as to what should be done. The length of the literature review is also a very common question that comes. In the first style, I would say usually for a PhD thesis, since we're talking mainly about PhDs here in this channel, I would say about 20 pages max. I wouldn't go for more than that unless there is specific reason. For the second style, you can go even a bit shorter if you don't have figures and pictures and stuff, but it's more condensed, as you can imagine, because here you don't have just paragraphs, you have a whole essay. I would not extend it too much because someone who's reading your thesis may get discouraged and a bit tired by just reading about others' work. At the end of the day, they want to reach at the point where you're saying, this is missing and this is my work. And I will not keep it too short because it means that you haven't done a very thorough literature review. Another thing that I have seen quite often when I'm examining PhD theses is to have multiple literature reviews for different areas of the research, of the area that the PhD is investigating. I don't really like that style. I don't think that anybody likes that style because, again, it makes you as an examiner going through another literature and another literature, and you feel that it's never going to end, that thing. So try to combine the literature reviews and put them all together. Another thing that I have seen, again, is that they have a literature review that leads to a gap in knowledge, and then there is a chapter or two with work. And then after that, there is another literature review and then another kind of gap in the knowledge and then another chapter. I strongly recommend to avoid that. It doesn't look good. Really, in the best thesis that I have read, it was never the case. So I strongly do not recommend that. So if you feel that literature review is not very important, you are making a big mistake. It is as important as the main context of your work is. It's the fundamentals, is the foundation of your work. Think about building a building with a very bad foundation, it will collapse. So it is the foundation of your work. Make it as good as possible, and then based on that, you can build your own work. I wanted to spend that video just to give you a few ideas of how you should start with it. I know that a lot of students feel that this is a burden and it's not really exciting, and they just delay that until very, very late in their work, which doesn't give them the understanding of what they're doing, and they don't even know where to start with the main context of their work. So it's something that should be done at the very beginning. You should be really engaged with that. You should start the literature review. You should put it right. It doesn't have to be too extended. You can make an excellent work, and if that foundation is put correctly, then believe it, that the next part of the thesis, the main body, will also be done at a much better basis. So hopefully you found that video useful. This is the information that, as I said at the beginning, I'm saying to my students every year, so hopefully they will be able to see that video and I will not have to repeat myself so many times. If you find that useful, please like and subscribe. If you have any comments, any questions, if you have particular issues with your literature review, please write them down below in the description and I will try to respond. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and until next time, bye bye.